Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. I'm really sorry it's been so long and there hasn't been an explanation. I'll make a video about that at some point. I am back for a reason today, and I'm glad to be back to be talking about this. So as you might be able to see because of the title, this video is actually about the Menendez brothers and the situation they're currently going through, their legal situation. This is not a true crime video. You know that my channel mostly deals in abuse dynamics, right? And abuses of power, systems of power, and how I believe all systems of abuse, whether that's, you know, within a family system, within society, I believe they're all connected. Okay, so it's hard to know where to kind of start with this case. I don't want to make this really long. What I want to do is to try and make this to spread the word and sort of help. So I'll just give you a warning now that this video is going to contain, not in any graphic detail, but discussions of abuse. So that's emotional, physical, and child sexual. I will warn you that this case is probably one of the saddest cases of injustice that I've heard of when it comes to abuse dynamics. So you might already know a little bit about the case, but if not, I'm just going to give you a really quick overview and then hopefully you'll understand why I'm talking about it on this channel and why it makes sense. Okay, so the murders happened in 1989. I'm reading from the screen over here. So you've got Lyle and Eric Menendez. So they are from an extremely wealthy family. They're brothers. So at this point they are, the older brother Lyle is 21, younger brother Eric is 18. Now they have, they live with their mother and father still, so that's Jose and Kitty Menendez. Now Jose is an extremely powerful businessman. He's working in the music industry. He's got a lot of power, a lot of wealth, and the boys are really raised to worship him. So what happens in 1989 is that Lyle and Eric kill their parents. They shoot both of their parents at home. They initially say that it must have been someone else must have killed their parents. Eventually, one of the brothers, the younger brother Eric, can't handle the guilt of what he's done, and he tells his therapist about what they did to their parents. It's a long story, and I will put the link to the Netflix documentary, which is narrated by the brothers themselves, in the description box. Basically, they end up getting taken in for the murder of their parents, and it starts to emerge that their reasoning behind what they did is very complex and very disturbing. So they allege that they were both abused by their parents, by both of their parents in different ways, and that this went on for a very long period of time. So sorry, this is quite graphic. I'm just going to say it in really plain language, and you know, I'll put the trigger warning at the start. So we've got extreme emotional abuse happening to these boys from a young age. So we've got that Jose Menendez was a very domineering father, perfectionistic, and you could almost say that he saw his children like trophies. So he raised them, and I don't mean to diminish anything they've gone through in the real world by connecting it to this, but I sometimes talk about the dynamics on the TV show Succession. The only reason I'm saying that, I'm not trying to connect these things, is that in a show like Succession, for example, or The Crown or something like that, which has problems of its own because it's sort of a drama about real people, and again, that's sort of iffy anyway, isn't it? When it comes to wealth and high status, it's not to say that you don't have more opportunities in terms of, you know, financial, you have more financial freedom. There's lots of things like you're not going to go hungry, things like that. But anyone can still be abused, you know, emotionally abused, sexually, physically abused. And in this particular case, and I think what Succession shows as well, is that actually in this instance, the brothers lived in Beverly Hills. Their wealth actually kind of worked as a sort of barrier. And again, I'll bring it back to something on the channel, and I'm not trying to say it's the same in any way, but we talk about the royal family, we talk about that system, we talk about Harry and the firm and what they're doing to Harry. Again, it's this situation where when somebody from a very wealthy family, and again, there's going to be privileges they've had, which people from poor families just aren't going to have. But when they want to come forward about abuse, which has happened to them, it's very easy for people to just say, well, you've had everything you wanted, you're spoiled, you're greedy, you know, you don't fit with us, you're not like us. And that basically happened to Lyle and Eric. Now, bear in mind that so it started to come out that from a very, very young age, the father had been sexually abusing first the older son. At a certain point, I think it was age 8. It makes me feel really sick to even talk about it, I'm sorry. It's quite disturbing. At about age 8, Lyle thought it had stopped. He thought, oh, thank God it's stopped. That part of the abuse has stopped. Now, bear in mind the threatening behaviour, the perfectionism, the total control over their lives in every aspect, making them trophies. Lyle was the golden child in the family. He was older. He's known to be more assertive, more protective of his younger brother. He was the one who would more often stand up to his father. But even in that, you couldn't really stand up to him that much. You know, like, he could push back a bit, but he didn't have any real power. He was still afraid. And he was really, really mistreated by the father. He thought it had stopped the sexual abuse on him. The other abuse remained. But, you know, living in the world they did, and living in the time, right, 1989, in the 1980s and before that, bear in mind that this was a time period when they didn't have social media, right? They couldn't tell if you were being abused in any way as a child or a teenager in that age range, in that time period. How on earth would you be able to understand what was happening? How would you know if it was normal or not, right? Who do you check against, right? You don't have resources. You're very isolated. And also, you know, their father deliberately did isolate them. He threatened the boys and said they weren't allowed to say anything to anyone. So it turns out that once Lyle stopped getting abused in that manner, although he was abused in lots of other ways, it actually switched to his younger brother, Eric. Now, Eric alleges, I have to say alleges, but I want to say I completely believe them, and I will tell you why later on. Basically, Eric got it instead. He was threatened he wasn't allowed to tell anyone, especially not his brother Lyle, and this sexual abuse of Eric went on until he was 18 years old. Sexual abuse by his father. So just that information that I've given you, it's a lot more complex, and it's actually a lot worse than you could imagine. There's emotional abuse going on. Their mother is an enabler of the father. The mother is sexually inappropriate, especially with the oldest son. I believe there's some substance abuse issues with the mother. This household was very toxic for these children. So these, just from the very start, despite all the money that they had, the emotional landscape, they grew up fearful, right? They didn't know who they were as people. They didn't have identities. So they were raised as these trophies. They were both quite good at tennis. They only ever pleased their father when they could be used, you know, as a trophy, and he could be proud of them. But as always with these systems, he didn't want them to get too cocky, right? So they couldn't win in the system. They couldn't reach their full potential, and they kept failing at their full potential. For example, when Lyle got away because he was more assertive than his younger brother, he was raised to be the golden child, so they had a different experience. And I think we've spoken about on this channel before, in an abusive system, abusive family, anything like that, the experiences of different members of the family will often be wildly different. And it can be the same environment, but it depends on your role. So when we talk about William and Harry, again, I'm not saying this happened to them, but when you look at a golden child and a scapegoat, they're in different roles. They're both in different hells, essentially. And again, we talk about this a lot, but this particular case is a case that is so fascinating and tragic, because this is an instance where this is an extremely dangerous way to grow up. And I think you would expect a lot of victims of this kind of abuse to turn on each other, because their father, I mean, obviously Eric, he was younger, he's seen to be more vulnerable and more sensitive, right? He was more quiet. In these families, they're supposed to be pitted against each other, right? Siblings will be pitted against each other. And there's a lot of abuse that can happen against each other, and that also happened in this family, unfortunately. Which was through no fault of either of the children. But their bond was strong enough, there was something in those children that meant that they actually maintained their love for each other through that system. And first of all, I just want to say, like, that is absolutely remarkable. If you're watching this as somebody who's lived through any sort of abusive system or anything like that, you'll understand, like, how much that takes, how incredible and rare that is, and beautiful that is, that those siblings did not turn on each other. Because in a lot of these systems, you will have a golden child throwing the scapegoat under the bus because they think that will win me more. It's basically, it's like, if he's abusing this one, he's not abusing me. So a golden child might sort of think, well, I'm more favoured. In this family, Lyle was much more favoured, but something in him made him want to protect his younger brother. They trusted each other. Now, again, this was also a time period when this went to trial. This was a time period when people believed it was said in the trial that boys couldn't be raped. They asked Eric on the stand. Now, this is an 18-year-old. I don't think he was 18 when he was on trial. That was when he was arrested. But this was a very traumatised young man who had been sexually abused for most of his life, emotionally abused for all of it. There was a lot of fear in him. He hadn't been allowed to develop. Neither of them had been able to develop who they were as people. Because when you're in an abuse situation like that, all you're focused on is surviving it, right? You don't know how to exist as a real person. You don't, and Succession does that pretty well. I'm not saying it's the same. I'm not trying to invalidate this very real and awful case, but that's kind of how the psychology works. And you had people saying to this boy that why didn't he stop it then? He must have liked it because he was a young man, right? He was a boy, he was a teenager. If he didn't want it, he should have fought his father, right? He should have stopped his father. He must have liked it. Now they're saying this to him on the stand, and you can still see the actual trial online, and it is absolutely traumatizing to watch it. Sorry if I'm getting a bit emotional. To have gone through that and the things they're saying to him, right? They refer to it as sex with his father. He must have liked it. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's really, really upsetting that they even did that. But this was the time period that this was tried during, right? So it was like, boys can't be abused. Why didn't you just run away? And again, this is important because people do not understand this. And I think even today, people don't quite understand this. People will say, oh, they had the means financially to go, right? There's a couple of things here where that doesn't actually ring true to me psychologically. And I feel like people aren't educated enough on this issue. When you are abused for that long, when you are in that situation, it batters down your sense of self. So you can develop a learned helplessness. These boys were groomed, and it was grooming since they were born. They were groomed to see their father as all powerful, and this was backed up by everyone around them. The adults around them were afraid of him. They were afraid of their father. Now imagine how two little boys must have felt when grown adults were frightened of this man. Nobody came to help them. They were asking their own cousins, is this normal? Like, what's happening? You know, is that all right? This is corroborated by the family, by the way, and sorry I'm being so all over the place with this, but I've rarely seen something more clear-cut. These boys act in every way consistently with people who have been long-term abused, in every regard. And yet when they were on trial, all the things that actually, to me, showed that they had been abused were then used against them. They were saying about Lyle, oh, he looks a bit dead behind the eyes on trial. Other way round with Eric, they were saying, oh, you know, his body language is odd. You know, he keeps fiddling with the microphone. You know, or he's smiling a lot. These are essentially abused children, and they ended up on trial. Bear in mind, once they were taken in, they confessed what they'd done. It wasn't a question of had they done it. It was a question of why they did it. They couldn't go, they say, and I believe them, because their father was very powerful. Now, if you have been raised with your father literally telling you that he will kill you, A, if you tell anyone about it, threatening other adults, to see someone that powerful, to be raised as if your father is a god, because that is how their father raised them, okay? They're not coming at this from I put rational in quotation marks. It's rational for their circumstances. And people were judging this as if, what would a rational person do who wasn't being abused? Would a rational person just walk into a room and kill their parents? Of course they wouldn't. Their psychologies had been totally messed up by the abuse. And that doesn't make them evil people. I 100% do not think that makes them evil people. They say they were afraid of their father. And when people say they don't believe that because they were like grown men, I just think that's absolutely ridiculous and doesn't make any sense. Because if you've got a father, bear in mind, up until the point where they did this man was still abusing his 18-year-old son. Somebody who can sexually torture you, someone who can do that to your body, that in itself is an assault, right? That is somebody showing they don't have any concern for you as a person. You are a vessel, you are to be used, you are a trophy. You have no worth, you're not a person, you're a thing. If someone can do that to your body from the age of 6, why on earth would you not think they would be capable of killing you? And bear in mind, this is somebody who cared so much for his reputation. Everything was about reputation with this man. It was classic, like, narcissism. It was, this is the thing I'm putting out there. My boys exist to show me off. I'm a great family man. You know, don't tell anyone. You know, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And he mapped out their futures. He got very, very angry and abusive with them when they couldn't meet his impossible standards. If you understand how people like that work, right? If they're not in control, that's it. I completely believe them, and it makes total sense on a psychology level if you understand these systems. It makes sense that you would think that man would be capable of killing you to preserve his name. Because think about the other things he's doing. I guess it boiled down to that people did not in that time period believed boys could be abused. They bravely spoke about this on the stand, and it's absolutely horrific. It's some of the worst things I've ever heard on this stand, right? And having to do this in public. This was on TV. They were asked if they liked it. They had Eric was questioning his own sexuality in relation to what happened, right? Because everything had been stolen for him, right? Neither of them existed as real people. They didn't have themselves. They didn't know who they were. They weren't allowed to be themselves. They were trophies and vessels of this man. There's like I said, there's learned helplessness and the sense that this man is a god. Now, when someone is abusive, you know, we often ask, why doesn't someone just leave, right? And we talk about that in terms of partners, in terms of families. It's even more insane that we would even say that with regards to children, because this is actually a being you bring into the world you're meant to protect. To a child, your parent is God. Right? It's a huge responsibility because you are the one who cares for that child. A child relies on you for everything to stay alive, right? For comfort. But we ask that question even when it's an adult, right? When it's someone who's in an abusive marriage, and we'll say, well, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just leave? Because people don't understand the emotional conditioning. Abuse it's not just a thing that happens to you and you remain the same throughout it. And, you know, you're just a rational human being abused. It drills, like, your sense of self is ground down into nothing, and they manipulate you into that place. Every abuser is the same in that regard. They will mess with your head and grind you down so that you'll either become completely submissive and pliant, you'll feel reliant on them, like you can't exist without them, or you might react. And we call that reactive abuse, right? So if someone's been being abused for a very long period of time, the person who's being abused, who is going through psychological torture, because that's what it is, especially if you can't escape, right? Especially if you're a child who can't escape the environment, you might lash out as a victim. And then we'll often turn on that victim in society and say, how could you do something so awful? And that makes me really angry, because we have no understanding of reactive abuse, right? And this also connects to politics, and I'm going to bring it here to Palestine and the absolute atrocities that Israel is perpetrating right now on Gaza and on Lebanon. People who are abused over a long period of time, right, who have no power, because abuse is about power, right? It's about a power imbalance. People are going to react in different ways. So you're going to have some people who become reactive, right? They're going to try and take on that abuser. And in some cases, those people will become a bit like the abuser, right? Because that's what they know. They will fight you with what you fought them with, right? Because that's what they know. Again, you're going to get some people who are really pliant, who are just appeasing, who will fawn. Some people who are just completely ground down by it. And this is, again, why I'm really wary of, like, when we're judging, like, minorities who are going through things so awful, like occupation, genocide, like systematic discrimination. You know, we judge their reactions often, and we don't ask how they got there. Now, that is not me trying to say that it's okay to hurt people in any way, and the Menendez brothers have said themselves to this day, they wish they hadn't done it. It wasn't the right thing to do. If they could go back now, they wish they'd never done that. They still love their parents. That's very heartbreaking. They still love their parents. But the thing is, if people are oppressed for long enough, people are hurt for long enough, people are going to resist. Human nature is resistance, right? And when you're under those circumstances for such a long period of time, you are going to stop acting in a rational way, because you're going to act in a way that is a response to your situation, right? So what this case boils down to is this is a lifetime of abuse for both of these boys. When the younger brother breaks down and tells the older brother about what's been happening all this time, and this has been corroborated by so many different people around them, there's just so many things, you just couldn't make it up. You know, they've got instances of different cousins coming to the house and noticing something was odd. Jose disappearing into a room with the boys, and then the telly being turned up and hearing weird noises, and fear in the household, and the boys asking strange, inappropriate questions like, is this normal? Should I be doing this with that? Things like that. We've got injuries to the boys when they were younger, which I don't want to get into because I feel really upset even talking about that. We've got, you know, they were injuries to the boys, which should have been flagged up, right? They were failed by the system time and time again. They feared for their lives, is what they say. They say that they killed them because they feared for their lives. And I believe that. They really believed that their father would kill them for exposing what he was doing to the younger one, to Eric. Because the older brother squared up. The older brother said, you're not going to touch my brother again. And initially they didn't even, all they wanted was for it to stop. That's what Lyle said to their father. he said, I don't want anything to, like, I'm going to take Eric with me out of this house, because Eric had hoped he'd be able to go away to college. His father decided no. And that was his out. All his life he had dreamed of, if I can just get through it, then I can get away to college and then I'll be all right. But his father decided, no, you're staying at home. You're going to go to college, but you're going to stay here. And that's what made Eric really just break down and become totally suicidal, because he felt he had no way out. His brother tried to negotiate with their dad. He tried to say to him, look, I know what's going on. I just want to take Eric with me. Or I just want us to be, me and Eric are going to be together. You're going to stop touching him. That's it. This doesn't have to go any further. You're going to stop touching him. And the father got very angry, but then he got very calm. And he just said, you've made your choice. And the boys say, even to this day, that they both know what that meant. And that meant that he would rather go through a murder trial, their father, than a child molestation trial. And they knew this man. And everything we've learned about this man and his personality tells me that A, that's entirely reasonable for those boys to believe in their situation. Everything. When it comes to abuse victims of abuse, especially child abuse, right, are not perfect people. And we want, as a society, we want perfect victims, right? That's just never going to happen. People are going to react in different ways. When someone abuses you, they grind down who you are, right? And in some cases, they break parts of you. They make you into a person that you never wanted to be, right? They will twist you and take you to these places. And that's what happened to these boys. They actually got to a point where this was the only way they could see as escaping. That was it. And if you read the case, and that might even sound like you probably might not even believe that with me saying this right now. If you watch, for example, the Netflix documentary and understand the full scale of this, their day-to-day life, what they went through growing up, it is absolutely 100% makes total sense that these boys would be terrified and believe that about their father. The first trial they had took a long time, and the jury was split. So a mistrial was declared. Bear in mind, they'd had to get on that stand and talk about their sexual abuse, right? And other sorts of abuse on that stand in front of each other. I can't imagine what that must have even felt like, and especially in that time period when people believed that boys could not be assaulted, and people would say to them on the stand, on the television, you should have just run away, you must have liked it. I can't imagine saying that. Watching it back now from the generation we're in, or you might be from an older generation, but I mean from the knowledge we have now, I just sat there and watched it and I couldn't believe it, and I wanted to jump through my screen and just hug them. The trauma of that, to go through that, and then for it to end in a mistrial. The jury was split. Now, the jury was split 50-50. The women, let me just explain this quickly. So, obviously it's not, are they guilty or innocent of the murders? They admitted they did the murders. But what mattered was it going to be a manslaughter? So, in a manslaughter case, it's, yes, we did commit the murders, we committed the crimes, so we need to pay a price for that. But there were circumstances around it. It was, you know, in passion, it was a reasonable belief of self-defence in the situation I was in. You know, there's also a thing called the battered woman defence, which at the time, so it would describe how a woman who was being abused by, for example, her partner, could snap, right? And after going through all that abuse, could do something awful. And obviously you'd still need to, you know, you can't go around killing people, you'd need to face a consequence for what you did. But there's an understanding that that's not the same as just a murderer, a serial killer coming in off the street and just killing people. These boys aren't a danger to society. In that time, they wouldn't accept that the same could be true of men. And they wouldn't even accept the same could be true of children. The men on that jury wouldn't go manslaughter. The women all wanted to go manslaughter, so there was a mistrial. And you know, I'm not saying this as in, oh, you know, it's all the men's fault, that kind of thing, but in that time period there was such a misunderstanding of abuse. There was such a misunderstanding. People did not understand the first thing about these dynamics, let alone that it could happen to boys. It was like they saw it as a weakness, like a moral failing in these boys, that they hadn't stopped it. And the thing that makes me so angry is they were failed at every single level. It wasn't for them to stop. It should never have got to the point where they had to do that to protect their lives, their bodies. You know, they really say they thought their father would have them killed because he wouldn't want the shame of being outed as what he was and what he did. And that personality type, we've seen it throughout history. We see it time and time again in abusive systems in different cases. That's how these systems work. It is not irrational to believe that, because that's always what happens, right? Whether it's in a big case like this where you think you're actually going to be killed to be silenced, or whether it's in a smaller way, right? So you're going to get smeared to be silenced. We see that in politics and things like that. The message is, I've got the power. You're not going to destroy me. I will destroy you. And it was going to be Darvo, right? Deny, attack, reverse, victim and offender. They were treated like they were the offenders in this situation with their parents. After years and years of this complex abuse and no help. They did this alone. It is remarkable that these boys made it through as far as they did and still loved each other and weren't terrible people. Right, to go through it's torture. These boys were tortured for their entire lives. So then it went to trial again. And it came about the second time just after the OJ trial. So the public were pretty angry about the fact that OJ got away with it. They felt that had been an injustice. And this was another high-profile case, right? These were two wealthy boys, right? People thought, they were living the best life ever. They were like in Beverly Hills kind of thing. And the judge made some really sick decisions. So he decided that in this second trial, he wasn't going to allow in the evidence about the abuse. Hardly any of it. So this jury weren't told those things. And today, if this was tried today, this is where the injustice comes in. If this trial was redone today, it would be absolutely clear cut that this would be a manslaughter, right? This would be a case of abused people. The abuse would be a heavy portion of this trial because it provides the context. It's not an excuse for doing something terrible, but it's an explanation that is completely necessary to understand the dynamic, right? That wasn't allowed in at the second trial. And it was there was no justice in that at all. It was really wrong. And it should have been today. And if it had been tried today, they would be out of prison by now. They have been in prison for, I believe, about 35 years, and worse than that, they separated them in prison. So the only person they had, Eric has said that Lyle was the only one in his life who ever protected him. Lyle has always been very protective of Eric, his little brother. And again, how remarkable in a situation like that in that family, where if Lyle wanted, as the golden child, he could really have just let Eric be the scapegoat all his life. He could have used that information. He could have just been like, you know what, I'm going to be the number one child here. Who cares about my brother? But he wasn't that person. He was a good person. They separated them in the prison to make a point, right? And they weren't a threat in that prison. They just wanted to make it difficult for them. So yeah, these boys were basically abused all their lives. The system failed them at every turn. They went through the justice system and got no justice. They weren't heard. They were mocked in their testimony. They were humiliated. There was the potential for them to potentially get the death penalty as well. Thank goodness the jury said no, better life without parole. And their lives in prison now, again, it's testament to who they are as people. They help other victims of sexual abuse. They've both got degrees in prison. They try and help people. Eric paints. I believe he's studying sociology. Lyle has got a degree. He started programs for victims of sexual abuse in the prison. Right, these are not bad men. They were abused children, and they are still being abused now. And anyway, this is why I wanted to make this video, is because there's a chance now. Sorry, I find it a really upsetting subject, as you can tell. The injustice of it is just so awful and wrong. There is a push right now to get the DA to relook at this case, because if they relook at the evidence, and there's even more additional evidence now, because since the case, new letters have come to light that Eric, the younger brother, wrote to his cousin way before the murders, talking about what was happening with his father and what was being done to him. There's lots of corroborating evidence from other people around them. There was a boy from a boy band that Jose was I don't know if he was managing it or he was in charge, who's now saying that Jose raped him when he was young, right? Same age, similar age to the boys. So all these things are showing what should have been clear all along, right? And it would have been if they had experts in abuse in that system, that these boys were victims, right? And they've been telling the truth the whole time. It's taken 35 years, and it's taken a societal shift. While they've been in prison, we've seen society move to a place where we recognise that men can be victims of abuse, that boys can be abused, that it's really complex, like that when you're abused, sometimes you still love your abuser, it's not easy to leave, that it does things to you as a person, right? There's no such thing as a perfect victim. And also there's no point in expecting a victim of severe long-term abuse to be this perfect victim and to act the way you want them to act, right? That's not something that we can expect of someone in that situation. There was a conference with their family yesterday. 20 members of their family, right? This is their dad and their mum's family on either side coming together to say that they want to push the DA to re-look at this, right? There is a really high possibility that this trial can be looked at again, okay? And that these boys might be finally allowed their freedom because they've already served a lot of time. The point of prison is obviously to punish and to rehabilitate. They've had their punishment and they would be an asset to society. Just their testimony, even now, inspires so many people. The family gave a conference, and I am going to put in the description box. Now, I'm saying please, 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 if you watched this point, go to that website, please, and you can sign the petition, which just shows, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, that you would really like the DA to please look at this case. It would mean the world to them, it would mean the absolute world to me, even if you don't care about this case at all, it would mean the absolute world. It would be doing a service to all victims of abuse to see that this is overturned and to get some sort of justice. They can't get those years back, they can't get their lives back, but they can get a sense of, it can be acknowledged that a wrong was done, and they can finally have some sort of peace and find some sort of healing, because their abuse has gone on since they were born. That's never stopped. They're abused by their parents, they're abused by the system, the legal system, they're abused in prison. It's just gone on and on and on. So I'm just going to ask you to please go on that website if you can sign the petition. Now, you're going to see me posting about this quite a lot. The family have put out, like, you know, you can put, there's like Facebook backgrounds, Instagram backgrounds, all those different things. This case is very important to me in regards to the fact that it covers so many aspects of abuse that we cover on this channel, right? They were treated in the worst possible way that you can imagine. And they were so brave. They were so incredibly brave. And to have gone through what they have, to have believed they were going to spend their lives in the prison, and to still remain good people, and to try and make life better for others while they were there, even knowing that they didn't think they had any hope of ever getting out of that prison, and they've just tried to make things better. These are not evil people. People who are abused need to be protected. They need to be given a chance to live, right? They haven't had that chance yet. They've not lived life on their own terms. Yeah, it's just a really devastating situation, the extent of what they went through and the whole system and how that happened. Now, you might know, I'm not going to get really into it, there's actually, Ryan Murphy did a Netflix series about the Menendez brothers. And what I cannot understand about that, okay, is, so the brothers have made a statement about that. Again, quickly, sorry, I'm all over the place. If you can, watch the documentary. The documentary is narrated by the brothers, and it explains, it's only about an hour and 20 minutes. It explains so much. You can see aspects of the trial on YouTube. If you just type in the Menendez brothers, you will see, and you will understand why a lot of people who are advocates for survivors, people who care about abuse dynamics, why they are talking about this case, and why I am subsequently also talking about this case, because it's about so much more than just this individual situation. Ryan Murphy made a kind of sensationalized version of their story, and you know, they've made statements. I think Eric said it's just very difficult. I think he said, I don't know why the truth can't just stand, because it's been sensationalized. Something he's done which is really unforgivable in that drama is, obviously these are victims of sexual abuse from childhood, and he has sexualized them in the show. And to me, that is just a line that I just can't understand why you would cross that. These are real people. This isn't a drama you've made up. If you're making up a drama, you can do whatever you want. This is real people living real lives who are still being abused right now. Why would you sexualize the abuse victim to the public? And it's just, there's a lot of things with that which are very dodgy. The only thing I can hope is that because of that series, you know, there is a lot of talk about the case, and hopefully that people getting into the case and understanding it, you know, maybe they might come from that, they will learn about it and they will understand what the brothers went through, and really get behind them. Yeah. So sorry it's been so long since I've talked. I just feel like if you have a platform, if any of us have a platform, we should speak up and use it, whether that be for the people of Gaza, who are really, I'm going to make a video on that tomorrow, that's an extremely distressing situation that's still ongoing, or whether it be, you know, people like the Menendez brothers. There's a lot of abuse in this world. There is a lot, abusive systems, they're everywhere, right? It's how our society runs, unfortunately. So there's a lot of victims in different ways of different things. And if we can do anything, I hope we can connect and educate and try and get people to understand, even if it moves really slowly. That's one thing I've taken from this trial. At the time when this happened and they went through their trial, you know, back then people didn't realise boys could be abused even, right? They didn't think boys could be raped. They didn't think boys could be victims because they were supposed to be strong enough to fight people off. And, you know, they didn't even think about that. At this point, the point at which I've come to this and learned about this case, we've come so far. And that's the only positive I can think of, is that we have moved so far. So we've just got to keep moving, right? We've just got to, it obviously makes a difference, even if it feels like it's going really slowly. It gives me hope that the things we're talking about today that are happening now, although it might feel like we're not getting anywhere, in 20 years, will there be young people learning about the things we're talking about and thinking, oh my gosh, they were so far behind? If this is like the small power we have, which is to talk and to try and humanise and to try and understand, then we can move forward as a society. They were failed so terribly all their lives. And I just hope that there's been a huge TikTok movement over the past year or so, apparently. People in the generation younger than me who have realised how awful this case was, and they put a lot of effort into, you know, getting this back into the mainstream. And they've been mocked in various ways. I think they're incredible. I think they're absolutely incredible, right? And it would just be wonderful if those young people today were able to, what they did and the hard work they put in, which is the reason why I'm even talking about it and knowing about it, because it's all kind of blown up, if that could help them, those brothers, right? Because those young people that they were needed that help. And the young people today feeling that and understanding that and feeling that deep empathy, that's incredible. And that gives me real hope for the generation coming up, because they're better than we are. They're better than we are. And that's as it should be, right? It should be that as people come up, they make us think harder and they open our minds more and question our beliefs. And I think that's incredible. So thank you for watching. I'll see you really soon to talk about my life and stuff like that, and just other things and how things have been going. And we need to make a video about what's going on in Gaza. That's extremely upsetting. Another case of severe abuse, you know. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm going to put links in the description box. I'm just praying so much for the brothers, for the Menendez brothers, for all victims of abuse, that they can find justice, really, and healing. I can't imagine, you know, what's been taken from them. It changes you as a person, you know, at your core. And then you grow up and you don't know who you are, right? Because sometimes all you've got is that abuse and the fact you know that you were abused. Who are you? And a lot of people are going through that, I think. And I think probably a lot of boys still are. I know it's better, but we still aren't necessarily willing to understand that men can be victims of abuse, and boys can. We're still very behind on that. And they can be. And they are. Alright. Thank you so much. I love you loads. I'll see you really soon. Bye.